On the 27th of January 2020, Gemma O'Doherty, Justin Barrett and John Waters organised an event in Balbriggan, County Dublin. All three had simply intended to book a venue, speak to an audience and discuss their ideas with those in attendance. However, this rather mundane activity was met with anger, violence, property damage and indeed sabotage. Although the event took place, I will attempt to accurately recall my experience of what happened on the build-up to the event and the evening in question. First off, anyone who expressed interest in attending the talk received a message with information that somewhat resembled the following. Event taking place in Balbriggan, County Dublin at 8 p.m. Exact location to be given 1 hour before the event starts. Why was the message received so vague, I hear you ask? Well, unfortunately, due to the sly and pathetic activities of Ireland's leftists, the organisers could not give away the exact location of the event for fear of reprisal. Prior to the 27th of January, leftist activists were contacting every establishment who took the trio's booking, spewed a narrative complete with every misused and weaponised label imaginable, and demanded that managers cancel the event or else face the repercussions. Unfortunately, these tactics were successful, hence the vague messages to conceal the location where the talk was taking place. But moving on, an hour before kick-off, the message came through with the event location. As it turned out, the only place Gemma, John and Justin could secure to speak to a group of people who desired to listen was an old boxing gym, due to successful attempts at sabotaging the other venues. Remarkably, within minutes of the location being made public, those who wished to attend were greeted by a mob of what I can only describe as utter lunatics. It was absolute chaos. The protesters had a smell that made me retch, and faces covered in spit as they screamed, "Nazi scum, off our streets." Many of them were deeply confused, and it was clear that they didn't exactly know each other. One interaction I witnessed was evidence of this. A random protester walked up to a random stranger. He screamed in his face, "Nazi scum, off our streets," to which the reply was, "I'm on your side." They then both turned to face another random stranger and screamed in his face. A woman who I never met in my life bravely approached me, and in the thickest Dublin accent, she hypocritically said, "Fuck off out of here, you homophobic faggot." So insane and stupid was this protester, she didn't realise she called me a homophobic slur and a homophobe in the same sentence. Work that one out. I must say, however, I felt violated to be approached by such a smelly, drooling fool. And although the intimidation and madness persisted, we were able to meander past the smelly mob and through the large gates where the event was to be held. Unfortunately, one of the speakers, Justin Barrett, was not so lucky. He was identified by the mob as he approached in his car. The protesters angrily blocked his path and screamed obscenities at him. Barrett stared back calmly and unimpressed as he inched his car forward in what I believe was an effort to safely gain access to the grounds where the event was to take place. His relaxed demeanour as he sat in his car undisturbed by their antics caused an escalation in behaviour, which resulted in the protesters beating their fists on his car. Eventually, a Garda intervention would see Justin Barrett directed to leave the area instead of controlling the smelly mob, and the event took place with one less speaker. However, the screaming and intimidation did not stop for some time. With several Gardaí standing at the front door of the gym, Gemma began to speak, and was regularly interrupted with loud and random chants of Nazi scum off our streets. The same for John Waters when it was his turn to address the audience. As the hours passed, the protesters eventually left the scene, but not without leaving their mark, particularly on the elderly and the women, who were threatened and intimidated by thugs for the crime of wanting to hear opposing views. At this stage, I would like to highlight the following. One of the protesters in attendance that night was Green Party member and now Minister for State Joe O'Brien TD. He posted a comment to his Twitter account, complete with a photograph of another leftist fool, claiming that he did his part against organised racism. And as mentioned, he did so by being part of a mob who were screaming in the faces of complete strangers and intimidating women and the elderly. It must also be said that to brand an event where a very small group of peaceful people wanted to hear the ideas of 3 individuals in a boxing gym, organised racism, is an absolute disgrace. And just to momentarily digress, I am not a racist, and I take issue with the liars and idiots who use that word thoughtlessly. In fact, I find it repulsive when people are treated differently based on their skin colour, whether that treatment is negative or positive. I served in Africa for 2 years with the army, and like many of my fellow soldiers, I sacrificed my money, my daily rations, and most of all my safety to help the people of Ethiopia, Eritrea, Liberia, and Chad. I only say this because it would take a very confused racist to put his life in peril for the safety of a person he is supposed to hate because of his skin colour. But in a post-truth and immoral world full of idiots, evidence of not being a racist is viewed as evidence of secretly being a racist. But back to Joe O'Brien and his mob of fascist fools. I believe wholeheartedly in freedom of speech and the right to protest, but what took place that night was not a protest in the honourable sense. And just as a reminder, I will quickly summarise how they chose to challenge their opposition. The left-wing lunatics in question called the managers of various hotels who were hosting Gemma, John and Justin's event in order to intimidate, frighten and threaten them until they complied with their demands. They roamed the streets of Balbriggan like a group of stalkers, waiting for the message of where the location of the event was to be held. Upon receiving that message, they blocked the entrance into the establishment and blocked traffic. They harassed anyone seeking to gain entry to the event and in some cases harassed themselves. They prevented the freedom of movement of one of the speakers and damaged his car in the process. And overall, they attempted to cancel the event using threats, intimidation and fear. And in fact, there is a word used to describe people who make demands and use terror in order to suppress political opposition and persuade people to comply. But why am I highlighting this story 2 years after the fact? Well, it's because it's happening all over again. And although Minister of State Joe O'Brien TD is not involved in this particular act of intimidation, his fellow ideologues are back to the old routine of defaming and vilifying a group of people, contacting hotel managers to frighten and intimidate them, and using fear and terror in order to deter people from listening to points of view that they have decided in advance are evil. But like I have said in many of my other videos and on social media, these people are stupid and dangerous, and it appears Minister of State Joe O'Brien TD is also just as stupid and dangerous given his past. I do, however, hope to cross paths with Joe again in the future. In closing, I will say the following. Laws are being considered and carefully worded at this moment to curtail freedom of speech under the guise of hate. And what is hate? Hate is exactly all the things they want to suppress so that their ideas can stay on top. It is a broad term that can and will be weaponized by the authoritarians of society, like Joe, to punitively attack those whose ideas they feel threatened by. While many people take no issue with politicians defining hate and creating laws to punish those perceived as being hateful, imagine if a politician was given the responsibility to define what is acceptable as humour, or what is acceptable as love or sadness. I ask such ridiculous questions because hate, much like love, humour, or sadness, is a subjective emotion, and any legislation created to govern the definition of what can be perceived as hate or humour or whatever is tyrannical in nature. If you don't like ideas, you have a right to ignore them, challenge them, or peacefully protest against them. However, I will say this: if those in opposition continue to rely on the tactics of intimidation, fear, and terror to suppress the right to freedom of speech and expression, they may very well prompt an unwanted response that will be spoken about for decades.